Welcome back to our series on the worst theme park accidents. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, we covered 5 shocking tragedies, including the Verrückt water slide, where 10-year-old Caleb Schwab was killed on the world's tallest water slide. Make sure to watch that after this video for the full story. Today in part 2, we uncover 5 more disasters that changed the amusement industry forever. From maintenance crews using glue on roller coaster parts to parks hiding dozens of injuries before a child's death, these stories reveal the dark secrets the amusement industry doesn't want you to know. This is the true tragedy of the worst theme park accidents. Story 1. Expoland's Fujin Raijin 2. May 5th, 2007, Golden Week holiday at Expoland in Osaka, Japan. The park was packed with thousands of families enjoying Japan's biggest holiday period. The Fujin Raijin 2, a standing roller coaster where riders remain upright through the entire ride, had been operating since 1992. 15 years of neglect were about to claim their first victim. 19-year-old Yoshino Kogawara was there with university friends. She was studying to become a teacher, described by friends as careful and thoughtful, someone who always followed rules. She'd ridden this Togo manufactured coaster before, without incident. The unique experience of standing through drops and loops made it a favorite among thrill seekers. The ride began normally. 24 riders stood in their positions, held by bicycle seat style restraints and over-shoulder harnesses. The train reached 75 kilometers per hour, navigating turns and drops. Everything seemed routine until they approached a banked curve halfway through the 2-minute ride. A sound like a gunshot echoed across the park, so loud that people hundreds of meters away turned to look. An axle on the second car, solid steel as thick as a man's arm, had snapped completely in half. Not bent, not cracked, broken clean through like a pencil. The second car, where Yoshino stood, immediately tilted violently to the left at a 45-degree angle. While still attached to the rest of the train and moving at nearly full speed, the car was now dragging sideways along the track. Yoshino's position was the worst possible. She was on the left side of the tilted car, putting her head and neck directly in the path of danger. As the tilted car scraped along, Yoshino was slammed into a guardrail support beam with tremendous force. The impact nearly decapitated her. She died instantly from massive head and neck trauma. Another rider in her car had his shoulder dislocated so severely it required reconstructive surgery. A woman suffered compression fractures in her spine that left her partially paralyzed. The investigation uncovered 15 years of criminal negligence that shocked Japan. The broken axle had never been replaced since the ride opened in 1992. Not once. The manufacturer Togo explicitly required wheel assembly and axle replacement every 5 years maximum. Expoland had ignored this for 3 complete replacement cycles. But what maintenance had done was even worse. 6 months before the accident, they discovered visible cracks in the axle during a routine check. These weren't hairline fractures. They were significant cracks that grew longer every day. Their solution defied all logic. They tried to repair the cracks with industrial adhesive. They literally put glue on a critical safety component that experiences massive forces thousands of times per day. Multiple maintenance workers later testified they knew this was insane, but were told to make it work or lose their jobs. One worker kept a photo of the glued axle on his phone because he knew someone would die and nobody would believe this actually happened. Inspection reports were completely fabricated for years. Inspectors would sign documents claiming detailed examinations that never occurred. Their version of visual inspection meant watching the ride operate from the ground for a few seconds. Nobody had physically touched or properly examined the axles in years. An inspection scheduled for May 3rd, just 2 days before the accident. The inspector signed the paperwork from his office without even visiting the park. 3 Expoland executives faced criminal charges: the park director, chief of technical operations, and maintenance supervisor. They were charged with professional negligence resulting in death. The maintenance supervisor admitted in court that he knew the axle would eventually break, but thought they had probably a few more months. He'd literally gambled with riders' lives on his guess about when steel would fail. The park tried to reopen briefly after removing the killer coaster, but public trust was destroyed. Attendance dropped by 90% overnight. Within months, Expoland closed forever. The park that had operated since 1970, that had hosted over 30 million visitors, died along with Yoshino Kogawara. Japan completely rewrote its amusement park laws. Government inspectors, not park employees, now physically examine every critical component annually. Detailed photographic documentation of every inspection became mandatory. Falsifying inspection records became a serious crime, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. Story 2. Galaxyland's Mindbender, Triple Death in the Loop, 1986. June 14th, 1986, West Edmonton Mall, Alberta, Canada. Inside what was then the world's largest shopping mall sat Galaxyland, featuring the Mindbender, an indoor triple loop roller coaster manufactured by Schwarzkopf of Germany. It was the mall's crown jewel, a massive indoor coaster that defied expectations. David Sager, Tony Mandrusiak, and Cindy Sims, all in their early 20s, were out for a Saturday evening of fun. The indoor setting meant perfect conditions, no weather concerns, controlled environment, consistent operations. They climbed into the last car of the 4-car train, pulled down their lap bars, and started the slow climb up the first hill. The Mindbender was intense by any standard. It reached speeds of 100 kilometers per hour and pulled 5.2 Gs through its triple loops, more force than astronauts experienced during launch. But Schwarzkopf had an excellent safety record. Their rides were engineered with German precision. What could go wrong? As the train entered the third and final loop at maximum speed, 4 critical bolts in the rear car's wheel assembly failed simultaneously. These bolts, each just 2 inches long, were all that kept the wheels attached to the car. They'd been improperly installed during maintenance just days earlier. The maintenance crew hadn't used torque wrenches, they hadn't followed specifications, they'd just tightened the bolts until they felt right. The rear car derailed while upside down in the loop, the worst possible moment. At nearly 100 kilometers per hour, inverted with massive G-forces, the car separated from its wheels and slammed into a concrete pillar that supported the loop structure. The impact was so violent that the car was nearly torn in half. Tony Mandrusiak, Rod Chaiko, and David Sager were killed instantly. The force of impact was so severe that identification was difficult. Their bodies had to be cut from the twisted wreckage. Cindy Sims somehow survived, but with injuries that seemed incompatible with life. Shattered pelvis, broken spine, massive internal bleeding. Doctors called her survival medically impossible. But the investigation revealed this wasn't a freak accident, it was predictable and preventable. The Schwarzkopf design manual, written in German, specified exact torque values for every bolt. These had to be precise to within 5%, measured with calibrated torque wrenches. The maintenance team didn't own torque wrenches, they'd never been trained on specifications. They couldn't even read the German manual. The bolts had been loosening for days. Other riders reported unusual sounds, vibrations, and rough rides. One rider said it felt like the car was coming apart 2 days before the accident. Every complaint was dismissed. The morning of June 14th, a maintenance worker noticed one bolt looked loose but decided to check it after lunch. Lunch was too late. This wasn't even the first warning. In 1983, a similar wheel assembly problem caused a minor derailment with no injuries. The park fixed that one car but never checked the others. They never implemented proper inspection protocols. They just crossed their fingers and kept sending people through triple loops at 5 Gs. The aftermath changed everything. The ride was shut down for a complete year. When it reopened, the 4-car trains were reduced to 3. Additional safety mechanisms, including anti-rollback devices, were added to the loops. Every single bolt had to be checked with torque wrenches and documented daily. The inspection checklist went from 1 page to 17 pages. Canada revised all amusement park regulations. Torque specifications became law. Maintenance crews required certification. Foreign language manuals had to be professionally translated. The Mindbender still operates today with one of the most rigorous maintenance protocols in the world, a protocol written in the blood of 3 young people. Story 3. Lagoon's Puff the Little Fire Dragon. When Children's Rides Kill, 1989. April 30th, 1989. Lagoon Amusement Park, Farmington, Utah. The Puff the Little Fire Dragon roller coaster was designed for young children. Gentle, slow, with tiny drops that wouldn't scare toddlers. 6-year-old Ryan Beckstead from Kearns, Utah was there with his family for a spring day at the park. Ryan had just reached the height requirement and was excited to ride his first real roller coaster without his parents. His father watched from behind the fence as Ryan climbed into the small dragon-themed train with other children. The ride operator, a 17-year-old girl working her first week on this ride, checked that lap bars were down and started the cycle. The coaster was so small and short that it ran 2 consecutive circuits before stopping. This was standard operation to give kids a longer ride for their money. The total ride time was still under 90 seconds. But this double cycle operation wasn't clearly announced or marked anywhere riders could see. As the train completed its first lap and started the second without stopping, Ryan thought the ride was over. This was his first time. He didn't know about the double cycle. He tried to stand up to exit, thinking something was wrong when the ride kept going. His 40-pound body easily slipped under the lap bar designed for average-sized children. Ryan fell onto the track bed between the rails just as the train started accelerating for lap 2. The operator saw him fall and reached for the emergency stop, but the button was on the opposite side of the control panel from where she stood. Those extra 2 seconds of reaching across the panel would prove fatal. What happened next was witnessed by dozens of parents and children. Ryan tried to get up and run, but the narrow space between the rails trapped him. The train caught him and began dragging him along the track. His father jumped the fence and ran onto the track, trying to lift the train cars off his son. Other parents joined him, desperately pulling at the 2,000-pound train. The operator finally hit the emergency stop after the train had dragged Ryan approximately 30 feet. By then, the crushing injuries were catastrophic. Ryan was pronounced dead at the scene as his father held him, covered in his son's blood, screaming for help that came too late. The investigation revealed systematic failures in what should have been the safest ride in the park. The double cycle operation confused young riders regularly. Several children had tried to exit between cycles before. The lap bars were a one-size-fits-all design that couldn't properly secure smaller children. The emergency stop button location added critical seconds to response time. The teenage operator was devastated. She'd received only 2 hours of training, mostly focused on checking heights and starting the ride. Nobody taught her about the double cycle confusion issue. Nobody showed her how to handle emergencies. She was making $3.35 an hour and was suddenly responsible for a child's death. She never returned to work and required years of therapy. But the worst revelation came from maintenance records. Other children had fallen from the ride before. At least 3 documented cases. They'd survived with minor injuries through pure luck. The park knew the restraint system was inadequate. They knew the double cycle confused children. They did nothing because nobody had died yet. Ryan's father became a tireless advocate for amusement park safety. He successfully lobbied for Ryan's Law in Utah, requiring extensive operator training, clear announcements for multi-cycle rides, and age-appropriate restraint systems. The law became a model for other states. Puff the Little Fire Dragon was modified with new restraints, automatic announcements, and better positioned emergency stops. It still operates today, though many locals refuse to let their children ride it. Every new operator is told Ryan's story during training, a reminder that even the safest rides can become death traps. Story 4. Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, Death at Disney, 2003. September 5th, 2003, Disneyland, Anaheim, California. The Big Thunder Mountain Railroad had operated since 1979, taking millions of guests through the wildest ride in the wilderness. Disney's reputation for safety was legendary. Their maintenance protocols were considered the gold standard of the industry. That reputation would be shattered in a single afternoon. Marcelo Torres, 22, was at the park with his wife, their 5-year-old son, and family friends. A Los Angeles graphic designer, Marcelo was celebrating the end of a successful project. They had waited 45 minutes to ride Big Thunder Mountain, finally boarding the lead car of the train for the best view. The ride began normally, climbing the first lift hill with the recorded soundtrack of old mining equipment playing. The train navigated turns, drops, and fake explosions as it had thousands of times before, but as they entered a darkened tunnel section, a catastrophic mechanical failure was about to occur. An assembly called the upstop wheel, designed to keep the train attached to the track during drops, had been improperly maintained. 2 days earlier, a mechanic had noticed the guide wheel assembly seemed loose. Instead of properly securing it with safety wire as specified in Disney's own maintenance manual, he simply tightened the bolts and signed off on the inspection. He skipped the safety wire because it would have taken an extra 15 minutes. Inside the tunnel, those improperly secured bolts worked completely loose. The locomotive suddenly jumped the track, slamming into the tunnel ceiling before crashing back down. The violent motion threw Marcelo forward, causing massive blunt force trauma to his chest. Behind him, 10 other riders were injured as the train cars jackknifed in the tunnel. The derailed train came to a stop in complete darkness. Riders were screaming, children were crying, and Marcelo was unconscious and bleeding severely. His wife held him while their 5-year-old son watched in terror. It took Disney emergency crews 12 minutes to reach them in the tunnel and begin evacuation. Marcelo was pronounced dead an hour later at the hospital from internal injuries. His son required counseling for years, suffering nightmares about the dark tunnel. The other injured riders included a 9-year-old boy with a broken neck and a woman who suffered permanent back injuries. The investigation revealed shocking negligence at the happiest place on Earth. The mechanic who'd skipped the safety wire had falsified the inspection report. He'd been working 16-hour shifts for 8 consecutive days due to staff shortages. Disney had been cutting maintenance staff to increase profits, despite record attendance. This wasn't an isolated incident. Investigators found a pattern of deferred maintenance throughout the park. Other rides had similar shortcuts taken. Mechanics were pressured to keep rides operational rather than properly fix issues. The phrase "good enough for now" appeared repeatedly in internal emails, but Disney's response made things worse. They initially blamed the accident on Marcelo, suggesting he hadn't been properly seated. Security camera footage proved this was false. Disney knew it was false when they said it. They were trying to avoid liability by blaming a dead man. The state of California fined Disney $315,000, the maximum allowed by law. The Torres family received an undisclosed settlement believed to exceed $20 million. More importantly, California completely rewrote theme park regulations, requiring state oversight of maintenance procedures. Disney was forced to retrain every mechanic, hire additional maintenance staff, and implement new inspection protocols. The Big Thunder Mountain Railroad was closed for a year for complete rebuilding. When it reopened, a plaque near the entrance memorialized those affected by the accident. Though Disney removed it after complaints, it was too depressing. The mechanic who skipped the safety wire was never criminally charged, but left the industry. In a later interview, he said, "I saved 15 minutes and cost a man his life. I think about it every single day." Story 5. Wild Wonder, The Full Horror, 1999. August 28, 1999, Gillian's Wonderland Pier, Ocean City, New Jersey. We return to the Wild Wonder disaster with details that were sealed in legal proceedings for years. Kimberly Bailey, 39, and her daughter Jessica, 8, weren't random victims. They were specifically selected for death by park employees. Car number 3 had been malfunctioning all day. Riders complained it felt loose, made grinding noises, and seemed to slip on the chain lift. Instead of closing the ride, operators were told to put lighter riders in that car to reduce stress. A mother and small child were considered light enough for the defective car. They were literally chosen to die because of their size. The chain dog that failed hadn't just been replaced with the wrong part, it had been butchered in the park's workshop. When the generic part didn't fit, instead of ordering the correct one for $800, maintenance ground it down with power tools. They removed approximately 40% of the metal, weakening it catastrophically. The maintenance supervisor later admitted he knew this was probably going to fail, but was pressured to keep the ride running during peak season. Internal documents revealed the park was facing bankruptcy. They'd cut the maintenance budget by 60% that year. Experienced mechanics were replaced with teenagers making minimum wage. The maintenance supervisor was actually a restaurant manager who'd been reassigned. He'd never worked on rides before that summer and learned from YouTube videos. The anti-rollback system hadn't just failed, it had been deliberately disabled weeks earlier. The clicking sound annoyed nearby residents who complained to the city about noise. The park's solution was to remove the springs that created the safety clicks. The system that would have saved Kimberly and Jessica was intentionally broken to avoid a noise violation fine. When the car rolled backward and launched off the track, witnesses described it as like watching a catapult. The car flew over 15 feet horizontally before crashing down. The impact was so severe that both victims were nearly decapitated. The concrete where they landed had to be jackhammered out and replaced because the blood had penetrated so deeply, but the cover-up was even worse. The park immediately offered the two survivors $50,000 each to sign NDAs and say the victims had stood up. When they refused, park employees began spreading rumors that Kimberly had been drunk and caused the accident herself. These lies persisted for years until court documents proved them false. The investigation found an email from 2 weeks before the accident. An engineer had written, "Wild wonder will kill someone if we don't fix it properly. I'm putting this in writing so when it happens, you can't say you weren't warned." He was fired the next day for negativity. The park initially told investigators the ride had passed inspection 3 weeks earlier. This was technically true, but the inspector was the park owner's brother-in-law who had signed the papers without ever seeing the ride. He later admitted he didn't even know what a chain dog was. New Jersey's response was revolutionary. They created the strictest amusement park regulations in America. Independent engineers now inspect every ride monthly. Parks can be shut down immediately for any violation. The Wild Wonder accident changed American amusement park safety forever. The two survivors who refused the bribe never fully recovered. The man remains partially paralyzed. The woman still has nightmares where she hears the chain breaking. Both testified that in the seconds before the accident, they knew they were going to die. They had time to think about their families, their lives, everything they'd never do again. Then the car launched backward into hell. This was the true tragedy of the worst roller coaster accidents of all time.